Welcome to Deep Look, Ultiworld's weekly radio show about the current state of Ultimate. I'm the host and the editor, Charlie Eisenhood. Joining me, Ultiworld senior editor Keith Rayner, on this Wednesday, November 1st. Keith, the big question is, what was Miles for Halloween?
Miles was a Superman, I guess. He had like Superman shirt. He has a Miles, like Super Miles cape that was made for him that he wore. And we went out. This is my first time trick-or-treating as a parent, and probably first time trick-or-treating in a long time. And we were like the first people out. Like I think we saw one other kid in the beginning. And so people were just like, they were like, no, take more. Cause their bowls were still like totally full. Yes. So, he was like just grabbing fistfuls of candy, and Jules and I were like, I guess we're going to have to eat a lot of candy cause he cannot eat all that. He had like a little bucket. It was full after like 3 houses. And then some kids started to come out as we started to head on our way out. But that's the life of being young, being a young child.
Yeah. In my neighborhood, down on Dykeman Street, which is a big like party neighborhood in like uptown Manhattan. They had like early afternoon for little kids to like come out and get them candy and whatever. And then it like became like later afternoon for the older kids, and then evening time for like the teenagers. And then after like 9 p.m., it just like was a club. And all the adults were out drinking. It's like a whole day affair. Very cool. Fun times.
They up here, like this wasn't my experience as a young kid in Atlanta, but like here, people were like sitting in their driveway. They had like tables set up. So like you weren't coming up and knocking on the door a lot of the time. You were like walking up the driveway and somebody was like sitting out front with candy, and often like, like fun little decorative.
I assume you and I did the same thing, which was walk house to house and knock on the door.
Yeah, we do. You knock on the door, and every once in a while, somebody had like an elaborate like there was like a guy in my neighborhood who like always set up like a haunted house and like
sure,
kind of like go through his house in the garage kind of thing. But yeah, for the most part, you walked up, you knocked on the door, you said trick or treat. Somebody reached out and gave you the candy or whatever, like,
and then you moved on. Yeah. I mean, I think that's like typical suburban experience. So it's interesting to me that it's different in Connecticut. I think,
I don't know if it's a neighborhood thing, if it's a regional thing or what.
Yeah. In New York City, there's like, in my neighborhood, all the kids go to the park, and then the parents just stand around with candy. And then the kids go from person to person, like just in the park and get candy. And then some people also trick or treat, but you can like trick or treat at the businesses, or
Weird.
like my apartment building had candy in a bin in our foyer. So you could just walk in and take candy and then leave. Like the only person who knocked on my door yesterday was my friend who brought his daughter here. They live just around the corner. So I don't know. It's interesting, like how different places do little cultural things slightly differently.
Well, now also you see like people driving, like people literally are driving, like, and they'll like hit a couple houses. They'll get back and they'll put the kids back in the car and like drive the next stretch. Or sometimes like cars will like follow behind the kids or whatever. It's weird out there. And not too far from here, I saw somebody driving around like a golf cart with a wagon behind it. I don't know if that's for candy or for children. Like they're like their kids are going to ride back there. Yeah. I don't know what it's weird. It's weird out here.
Driving is okay if you are going to the like cool Halloween street in your city. Cause every city has one. Every city has the cool Halloween street, where people go all out, and it's like a battle of the homeowners association to see who can do the best. But otherwise, driving feels weird to me. But again, that's just because that's how I just walked out my door and then walked in the like 3-block radius of my house to go trick or treating.
And I understand the interest in like, being protective of your own children or whatever, but like I feel like the last thing you want to introduce to a holiday literally about child pedestrians is more cars. So I'm disinterested in general in like people driving excessively. Driving to a location, getting out of the car and enjoying the location is fine. Driving around in the location seems fraught with peril. So
I mean, it was cold last night. That's the other thing. Maybe people drive because they wanted to have the heater on in the car. It was pretty cold.
Yeah, I wonder, like, what's Halloween like in like Alaska, or like what are people doing?
I don't know
up
what
there?
anything is like in Alaska. I don't.
Cold is the answer. Cold.
We got to have Bo on to ask him about Alaska.
We need an expose on Alaska. Ultimate in Alaska. Yeah.
I'm not sure there's much to expose. All right, let's actually talk about some Frisbee. We got kind of a packed show today. We're going to be talking Beach Worlds, which starts today. By the time this podcast comes out, it will have already started. And we also have an interview with USAU board member Ben van Heuvelen, who is part of the committee to form the new strategic plan that was launched last week on the USAU website. We got to dig into that. And BVH, who also coaches Pony, will dig into that with us, because even though if you just look at the top line stuff, like the overarching goals, it looks like the same strategic plan as before, but it's not actually. Like, there's a lot of things that have changed, and we're going to dig into that. We've also got the question of the day and some discussion about observers and kind of like rule stuff after nationals. But first, we need to make a correction, Keith, because last week on the show, we talked about the truck dig situation, the strip call that was missed. Dig would have won had it been called a strip, the whole thing. And then the conversation following the game about, should this result be overturned? And there was a bunch of things going on. And we basically just talked about what we had heard in sort of the fog of war at nationals. And we just got some stuff like totally wrong. So we need to make a correction here. And appreciate Jake Smart from Dig reaching out and being like, hey, you guys got this wrong. Here is the situation. And really, it's on us to have done a better job of like actually doing the fact finding. There's actually an article coming out about this entire situation that I think is going to be fascinating from Edward Stevens. That's coming soon. But Keith, I think it's important to note a couple of things in particular that we got wrong. One is that we said that Dig went to USAU and said, we are appealing this ruling and we want to have won the game. Basically, that's just not true at all. There had been a lot of people talking to USAU folks, particularly Adam Goff, the men's director, about this result immediately following the game. So, like, lots of people were coming up. It was very evident immediately that this call had been blown and that Truck had won the game after a blown observer call. And so conversation started well before Dig got involved. And so then Dig coaches joined the conversation and there was discussion about like, what is the deal? What is the scenario here? And it's not really the case that Dig ever even said, we are officially appealing. It was just like, here's this, here's what happened. We're talking about it. USAU basically said it's very unlikely that this is going to get overturned. There was like a internal USAU meeting and they said nothing's going to change. The outcome is the outcome because this was a judgment call from the observer. So while Dig was involved, certainly Dig had an interest in potentially seeing the result overturned. It isn't accurate to say that they were the ones who initiated the conversation. That was more like people talking about it in general. There was discussion with some of the commentators from the game, with a USAU person. Then the observers from the game got involved. And so it was kind of like more informal. And it was not like Dig came and said, hey, this was totally unfair and we got screwed and we're appealing. Truck stop coach Alex Crew came into the conversation late. There was a little bit of discussion back and forth between those two, but at no point did the Dig coaches say to Alex Crew, you guys should forfeit the game. It was more of like, let's talk about what happened here. The Dig coaches asked Alex if he had watched the video yet that showed it was clearly a strip. Alex had not seen it. And so a lot of this stuff was like basically just rumor mill or like things, people making assumptions. And we took that the conversations that were happening at nationals is sort of at face value, which we obviously shouldn't have done, and we know better than that.
Couldn't have said it better. I mean, we got to make sure that we're giving you the facts when we have them, and when we don't, making sure that we either tell you we don't have them or going to get them, which we didn't do either in this case. So that's our bad. But glad we can provide some clarity. One other item related to this that I think probably bears some or deserves some clarification. I think there was a sense that Dig had like also was like protesting their next game by not starting with Revolver. And that to be clear, that was not the case. I think there's a rumor that like went around at the field. So just to like kind of stamp that out. The game didn't actually start. That game was delayed. Right. It was delayed by USA Ultimate in order to help resolve this issue. It was not Dig was like, well, we're not going to play until you figure this out, or
somebody made an assumption that that's what Dig was doing, basically. Right. And again, we took that, people were in the Discord talking about this as all of this was going down. We were on our live podcast, remember, Keith, as like this whole situation was happening. And people were in the Discord like, I'm here at Nationals, Dig's not playing because they're protesting the game. And like, you can easily see how you would assume that that's what was going on, because it sort of was, right? Like Dig was in a conversation with USAU about it, but the mechanics of it actually do matter, and like how it played out matters. So apologies to Jake Smart and Dig for making it sound like, and it's not even necessarily like they would have been totally out of bounds to make an appeal. I'm surprised that this went on as long as it did, because everything I said about, this is sports, like that's just still true. Like you're going to be blown calls, and there's no way that this was going to get overturned. And I'm surprised that it took as long as it did to actually resolve this. But it's not like this was all Dig. This was more like USAU was talking about this, and Dig was involved, and then Truck was involved, and then they made a decision. So
yeah, it is interesting that it did take that long, only because like it's so obvious that it's not going to get overturned. Like,
right.
It's just never going to happen. But I guess I appreciate that USA Ultimate was willing to investigate despite that fact, like just to like make sure everybody felt heard and that everybody was clear on the outcomes and the whys behind that. But yeah, I think maybe people's imaginations got a little ahead of themselves outside of this conversation, as they're wont to do when there's a big dramatic thing and then the powers that be are literally in a huddle. Like it's natural to start to come up with ideas as to what could be being said and what the potential outcomes could be. But that doesn't make it news.
All right. Beach Worlds is starting today. It's a 5-day tournament. A lot smaller than the last Beach Worlds. This, of course, was the delayed Beach Worlds. How long has this been delayed now? Wasn't this supposed to happen in 2020? I can't even remember now the timeline of this tournament.
The last one was in 2017. So is
presumably it should have been in 2021 then, or is it every 2 years? I don't even know. If I recall correctly, it was originally scheduled and then it was delayed for COVID, and then it was delayed again, and now it's happening. But regardless, because of the timing in the year and the fact that it's in the US, and we've had a lot of tournaments, a lot of international WFDF tournaments in the US over the last, year or so, a lot of reluctance to travel for this tournament from European countries and countries in general. So you don't have a ton of representation from everywhere. And so, the open division and the women's division could have hosted 24 teams, as could have mixed, but instead it's a 10-team open tournament. It's a 7-team women's tournament, 14-team mixed tournament. And 2 of those teams are not even country-based teams. They're kind of like club teams. One of them, to be fair, is a team from China who just got involved too late to have a official Team China. So they're kind of an unofficial Team China. So those 2 teams aren't even really eligible to win the tournament. They have they're going to like play games in pool play, and then they're going to play off amongst the 2 of them, Milo Dino from Singapore and the TC Pandas from China. in kind of like this separate division that got rolled into the main mixed division. There are no Master Opens or Women's divisions. Master Mixed is 7 teams, and then Grandmaster Open is 7 teams. Not all the countries out here, Keith. No Australian teams. But you've got USA and Canada, many of the big countries from Europe. Singapore is well represented. The Philippines are well represented. And Japan is here as well in all 3 divisions. So it should be really fun, especially when we get to the bracket, because the team quality is really good for the teams that are here.
Yeah, it's hard not to think about this tournament, the shrinkage that we've seen here. Lost divisions, and then even some countries not attending at all. Including countries that were figured pretty prominently into it, and for different reasons that we don't have to go into. But like no Russia also, who obviously played probably the most notable dramatic game last time in 2017 in the women's final. But also no India. So there are definitely some countries you thought might be here back in 2017. You're probably thinking, okay, well, I wonder what they'll do next time that aren't here. But also you see teams like moving out of divisions. Like there's no mixed team for the Philippines, but they are in women's and open. So like there's stuff like that there maybe you would see some shifting around across different teams, but altogether, it still should be a pretty interesting tournament. I wonder, like, it does make me wonder, like, I can't decide how much of this is an effect of the pandemic, of being like, it feels like the WFDF calendar is pretty taxing on the pocketbook. Like the ultimate calendar in general is pretty flush, and then you got these, asked to travel around the world multiple times a year for some of these teams. I don't know. It's felt pretty packed to me lately, but beach is like kind of a foreign world to me. I have very little beach experience of myself, so I'm interested to see how players and teams adapt.
It's gonna be fun. I mean, playing beach ultimate is great fun, and Huntington Beach, just south of Los Angeles, great beach for ultimate. I mean, that's basically where they play layout now. I've actually never been to the layout that's at Huntington Beach. I've always played in Santa Monica, but more or less the same sand and beach quality, and it's great. The weather looks like it's going to be spectacular, so that's awesome. If anything, like a little too hot, but hard to complain about that in early November. I feel like we should run through the rosters, Keith, of Team USA, because I think a lot of people probably just don't even know who is on this team. So why don't you take us through? We can start in men's. Why don't we? Oh, open. Excuse me.
Yeah, we'll run down in the order that USAU posted them on Twitter, I guess.
Okay.
So the open roster for Team USA: Christian Boxley, Delrico Johnson, Mario O'Brien, Ben Yacht. Goose Helton was rostered. I think it's fair to say he won't be competing. I don't know how many players are missing across these rosters in general, but these are the rosters that were posted. Jonathan Nethercutt, Tyler Monroe, Alan Laviolette, Roland McDonald, AJ Merriman, Rafi Hayes, Calvin Brown, Jimmy Mickle, Eli Kearns, Jack Hatchett, Chris Kocher, Daniel Lee, Johnny Malks, and Antoine Davis, coached by Brian Jones and Tyler Kinley in the open division.
It's a lot of players for a 5-team, 5 players on the field, but that is stacked. That's got a lot of players who are just had awesome nationals. Rafi Hayes about to go crazy.
He definitely seems like a nightmare matchup. But yeah, I mean, you're talking about a lot of the players we had, in the top of our top 25s. These are many of the top names from that list. Most of the players on this probably receive votes for top 25. So you can expect a lot of talent. The U.S. is going to be the favorite in every division. Maybe the most in the open division.
Yeah, arguably. What's next roster?
All right. So next roster up is the mixed division roster. Simon Higgins, Erica Bacon, Kayla Helton, Luisa Neves, Harper Garvey, Cami Groom, Carolyn Finney, Jacob Smith, Rena Kawabata, Kristen Pajunas, Noah Backer, Nikki Spiva, Sarah Mexstroth, Caleb Denicourt, Sadie Zajerski, Sean Mott, Marquez Brownlee, Kelly Highland, Khalif El Salam. They're coached by John Gross and Ken Porter.
Very, very solid roster. Let's keep in mind, right? The process for building these teams has changed. Back in 2017, it was like, hey, we're going to name people team captains and they're just going to pick their friends to play on the team with them. And then they did that. And then the women's team didn't win gold. And USAU was like, oops. I think we can all be honest, right? Beach Ultimate isn't taken as seriously as Grass Ultimate. But these teams are way, way more competitive and better built than they were when we last attended this tournament. It's now been 6 years, which is, it's like a whole different generation of players at this point. How about women's?
All right. Our women's division roster, Maggie O'Connor, Jessie Schaffner, Lindsay McKenna, Claudia Tajima, Jamie Erickson, Amy Zhou, Becky Malinowski, Sam Rodenberg, Crystal Davis, Bridget Meisner, Nat Bova, Lisa Becaithley, Slim, Claire Trope, Maggie Rudin, Dina Elamelik, Robin Fenig, and they're coached by Sam Broadus and Sean McCall.
That's a nasty roster, Keith.
Yeah, got gold medals on there, got size, got throwing, got Claire Trope.
Good place to be.
You get some intimidation factor when imagine you're going out on a beach line and it's Claire Trope and then like Dina Elamelik, Lisa Becaithley, and Becky Malinowski, just like giants, and then
monster
the tallest
size
5'6" player in the history of the world.
I genuinely think they like picked for size after getting dunked on a bunch by the Russians in 2017. I'm serious.
Maybe, but
look at this roster.
Yeah, it's big. It's tall.
And it makes sense. Like on beach, it's helpful even more, I think, than on grass to be tall. Like
in a lot of experience,
speed is kind of muted, and jumping is kind of muted. So it's like quickness and height are like better skills to have, I think.
I feel like reach, like just like taking up a lot of room, is advantageous on such a small field. Yeah. So just like, having that wingspan so that you're clogging up, a third of the field when you're in a lane is like, seems pretty good to me.
All right. So let's talk about the teams that could cause the U.S. problems. They're going to be the favorites. We know the drill here with U.S. teams. The Germany mixed team, Keith, needs to be watched out for. Okay. So
any names we're going to recognize from that?
We know that they cause problems for everybody at World Games. Okay. And we have a number of the players from the World Games on this roster. Most notably, Lena Troutman and Levka Walchak, who just were incredible for Brute Squad in their win at Club Nationals. Conrad Schloer is on this team. He was fantastic at World Games. He had a great club season as well. Charlotte Shaw. These are the highlights. This is going to be an extremely competitive team, Keith.
Yeah, I mean, and Germany has a pretty strong track record. I think they won gold in 2015. They lost to the U.S. in semifinals, and then lost I think they lost the bronze medal game too in 2017. Like they were probably one of the top challengers to the U.S. in 2017 as well. So this is a nation that's had a lot of success on beach and is probably going to be able to carry over some of that experience to this group, but super talented group that, especially in a game with a smaller side where you could really concentrate your talent and maybe run some people a bit more. These games feel fast paced. So this could definitely play in the favor of Germany. This might be the most dangerous non-US team in any of the, I'm going to call them prime divisions, any of the non-masters, grandmasters divisions.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's probably one of those teams that I look at and say this team has a real chance to beat the U.S. and win gold in a long time at any of the big international tournaments. And I mean, the U.S. mixed team is excellent, but they're going to have their work cut out for them against this German team. Now, Colombia is only competing in the mixed division. They're always a country you got to look at. They're going to be really good. I don't know They don't have everybody. That's the big thing. They don't have the Cardenas sisters. And I think that really limits their ceiling. But they do have Ina Cartagena, Maria Ferrero, Jimena Montaña, a lot of the male names from the World Games team, Julio Duque and Ivan Alba. They're going to be they're going to be very solid. I'm going to be curious to see how they handle beach style play relative to what they've been able to do on grass. But if they had Manu and Vale, I would feel like this team had a real good chance to win. And I feel like their ceiling is probably more like semis with this roster.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be matchup dependent, like kind of who runs into the U.S. in semis. But I definitely think semis is like kind of my expectation for this group. Like they should be contending for semis at least.
Anybody else you want to point out, Keith?
Well, you always got to keep an eye on Canada. I know it's been a rough go for them lately, and certainly they've done me wrong. But there are plenty of names that we've seen successful on grass across this Canadian roster. So they still have somehow they still have Justin Norden, but there are still strong players on this roster. So keep an eye out for them. Beyond that, I don't know what to make of like the Japanese roster, but I think it's always silly to rule them out. And the French roster is also somewhat potentially interesting. They have like SPS, Sasha Poitsakolsky, Nasser Mbaye Vogel. They have Lisa Bourneau from their World Games team. So there's some talent on the French roster too. I think that they could be kind of a sleeper team. And we've seen the rise of Singapore lately, so I'm just keeping an eye on any of the Singaporean teams. That's just the flat rule for now. Until they show me they're not interesting, I'm watching out for them. And lastly, Ukraine is sending a team. That is unbelievable to me.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible.
I've no expectations, like
no,
good or bad, for what they're gonna do, but unbelievable that they're sending.
It's cool
a team.
They're here. It's cool they're here, no doubt. I also we haven't mentioned them yet, but we need to. Philippines. Keith, I mean, they take beach ultimate very seriously. And the Philippines teams have been outperforming across the board. Look at what they did over at AOUGC earlier this year. And their best discipline is beach. This is like Nadal on clay. Like, it actually makes a difference, and I think that they have a chance to outperform across all divisions. Do not be shocked if they medal everywhere. And who knows? They might be a legitimate threat to win the whole thing. I don't know their players well enough to speak to specifics in terms of like what kind of expectation should we have, but I would expect that particularly their mixed and open teams are going to have a real good chance. Oh, they're not competing in mixed.
I think their open team is probably the one. They're like the 3 overall seed. I think that they are probably the biggest threat. Are they the 4 overall seed in open? And they Antonio Francisco back. He was like really the key factor for their mixed team in 2017. So that open team is definitely the one I think to watch. GB Open also. They have Justin Ford, Tom Abrams, Connor McHale, Ash Yo. Those are Benny Ollie Gordon. Like these are a lot of the biggest names in their scene. So that GB roster, I think that's a team to me that looks like they're like, we're planning on being in the final. We're planning on trying to challenge the US. I think they're probably the favorites in the open to be the top challengers, to be the silver medalists.
So Philippines, of course, won AOUGC in the open division. So Keith, you mentioned him, Antonio Francisco, in the finals of AOUGC where they beat Australia 15-12. He had 5 assists and a goal. Wilbur Ogok, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but he had 2 goals, an assist, and 3 blocks, no turnovers. They were deep. They were very impressive. They withstood a big comeback surge from Australia, who got 3 straight breaks to get within 1. Their D-line managed 3, 4, 6, 7 breaks in the game against a very solid Australian Open team that featured Alex Latamatos and Tom Tullett and many of the other big names, Alex Gann from Australia. So that was on grass. I'm just noting this team has to be taken seriously.
Yeah, the one division we haven't really talked much about yet is the women's division, where you might say that it's still like US and Canada. Like that's I think what people will be looking at. You look at the Canadian roster, you've got BDS, you've got Anush Bodri, you got Alyssa Mason. So they're bringing some of the big names to play out in the Canadian side. And Spain women's, I think, has a little bit of buzz coming into the tournament. So watch out for them as a potential sleeper. And then, we mentioned some of the other countries that'll be represented there. Japan, Philippines, Singapore, so GB as well as the number 2 overall seed. Although I don't put too much stock in seedings because they're based on results from 6 years ago. Like,
yeah, I mean the seeding is basically meaningless. GB women are the 2 seed in the women's division. They have no chance of finishing that high. So I don't really think it means anything. You got to look at the rosters.
The other weird thing to mention, did you see the men's format? They're playing a round robin with 10 teams.
Wow.
Your pool play is 9 pool play games long. So I know you mentioned that it looks like a lot of people for that open roster for playing with small sides, but yeah, a lot of games.
And then top eight advance.
Yeah.
I mean, there's short games. Games are 45-minute caps. There's basically no break for halftime. You just mirror and maybe grab a drink of water and then get back on the line. Running clock. Like it's, you're playing few games a day, and it's just, it takes a little less out of you running around on the sand when you lay out. Doesn't bang you up as much. Should be fun. We're streaming 50 games from Beach Worlds, so make sure you get yourself a subscription. Standard subscribers will get access to all of the showcase games with commentary. Got a great crew of commentators led by Katie Killebrew and Evan Lepler. And then all access subscribers also get the bonus streams, an extra game around throughout the tournament. And you can also get an event pack if you just want to watch that and not have a subscription. So check it all out, all up at ultiworld.com, schedule, how to watch, all that good stuff. And hopefully you've already watched, because by the time this comes out, the tournament will have started. And there's free games every day on our YouTube channel as well. So tune in for those. We're going to take a break. When we come back, Ben van Heuvelen joins us to talk about the USAU strategic plan moving forward 2024 and beyond. Stay with us. Joining us now on Deep Look is Ben van Heuvelen, who is an elite athlete rep on the USA Ultimate Board of Directors. He's also the co-chair of the Strategic Planning Advisory Group, along with Tom Crawford as the other co-chair. Also the coach of New York Pony. BVH, welcome back. It's been a while.
It has. Thanks for having me. Good to see you guys.
Good to see you too. Before we talk strategic plan, I do want to ask a little bit about nationals. Pony had this incredible roster this year. I'll just keep it simple. Why didn't you guys pull it together and win this thing as many of us expected and predicted?
That's a topic of a lot of soul searching right now, Charlie. I think we felt really good coming into the tournament. Our preparation felt really solid. The team felt very cohesive. And I think that any analysis has to start with a really phenomenal game that Ring of Fire played in the quarters. There's no way we lose that game without them playing their absolute A+ game. So hats off to those guys for really bringing it. I think that there's a whole lot of other stuff that I can think of, both within our control and outside of our control that affected the outcome there. And I guess all I can say really at this point is I've been coaching and playing long enough to have a lot of different flavors of losses. in my past, uh, this was not the worst. It was definitely frustrating because of a lot of things outside of our control that happened that contributed to our losing. Um, but I also felt like we played really hard and we were proud of the effort and the performance that we put in. And it's just a reality that, nationals is the hardest tournament to win for a reason, because every other great team is putting together their A game and gunning for you. And even the very strongest teams in history, including ours, which I would count in those ranks of, most talented teams assembled ever, uh, if you run the tournament 10 times, nobody wins 10 times. So, I think it's kind of a mix right now for me between trying to be a little philosophical about it, and thinking about, a lot of the really positive stuff that we feel proud of, and also taking the right lessons away from it.
You've been around the game for so long. You've seen a lot of great players. It's not, you're seeing DC get their first title ever. We've seen all these different types of champions. Do you think that, from your estimation, it's harder to win a title now than it basically ever has been before?
I think that the depth that we're seeing in, say, the top 8 teams in the country is better than ever before. And I actually had a few really fun conversations with folks who were in San Diego for the Hall of Fame induction, who are sort of my era of player, and were out there watching some of the games that I was coaching, and their observation, and I agree with it, is, sort of, hey, I think that the top 20 from 15 years ago could match up great against the top 20 right now. But the bottom half of any roster 15 or 20 years ago wouldn't stand a chance against the bottom half of any of these rosters right now. And I think what that means is just that, the floor on the performance of any given opponent is really high. And I think it also means that all of these teams, especially if all of the players really get locked into roles that optimize their strengths and compensate for their weaknesses, like a really well-coached team with really great tactics can achieve a whole lot, and the margins just aren't all that big between the very top and that next level.
I know this question's hard to answer right now. This last pony question. Are you going to just try to run it back? Are you coming back as coach and players are back on board to try to be like, hey, we have unfinished business in 2024?
One of the things that I was most proud of after we lost, I guess it was two Fridays ago, I had all these feelings of doubt around, well, if we had such a talented roster and we didn't win, that must be my fault. I'm the coach. And I think that a lot of guys had these feelings of, how do we really think about this objective result failure? And then we went back to the house where we were staying, and that night we had a team meeting, and it was just sort of a, hey, let's recap the season. Let's give everyone a chance to just sort of reflect in a group setting. And the sentiments that came out in that meeting were beautiful. And, I would say that, to paraphrase one of my teammates, it was, I'm so grateful that I have a group of guys that I care about so much, and that there is something that we have together that is so meaningful that it can make us feel this bad. And, if you had asked me at the beginning of the season as a coach, what would you want your players to say at the end of season meeting? What are the kinds of sentiments you would want them to express? I couldn't have scripted it better. And so there was this real interesting, difficult to process contrast between the profound disappointment of underperforming by any reasonable objective measure, and then this extreme feeling of pride over the level of cohesiveness and the team culture and the quality of the experience that we had built. And so I think for me, I can only speak for myself. It was just a really wonderful, beautiful experience. And if you have that kind of experience, how could you not want to come back and do it again? And, I don't know if there's going to be a lot of turnover or a little turnover, but my general sense from talking to guys over the last couple of weeks is that nobody's feeling profoundly discouraged. You can simultaneously feel extremely disappointed and also really energized and motivated at the same time.
Well, you wait 2024 already. It was a great club season. So the reason you're here, though, is not to talk about Pony. It's to talk about this new strategic plan from USA Ultimate, which was released right before Nationals, so nobody's looked at it yet. So I want to kind of dig into how this process worked, what the tenets of it are, and really try to drill down into like what has changed since the previous plan, which was rolled out in 2019 and was obviously horribly altered by the pandemic. So I actually want to start by reading off the 2019 kind of like primary things and then read this new one. And I want to know like what the differences are off the top, because they seem similar in a lot of ways. So in 2019, it said, these are like the 4 pillar goals: increase access to and participation in the sport with an emphasis on inclusion and local development. Enrich the community's experience with USA Ultimate by enhancing the excellence and impact of program structures and events. Increase awareness and credibility as an innovative and highly respected sport through exceptional communications, marketing, and branding. And ensure USAU is a community-focused model national governing body by investing in its organizational excellence, effectiveness, and sustainability. Now, this year's we have accelerate sport participation by empowering local communities, schools, universities, etc., to provide the most exceptional opportunities for youth as well as new and developing players and coaches. Overhaul how USAU interacts with and supports local disc organizations and meets their unique needs in serving their communities, growing the sport, and thriving as businesses. Drive increased interest, enthusiasm, and support for Ultimate and USAU through collaboration, communication, and marketing. And increase USAU's capacity and capabilities to deliver exceptional customer service, advance implementation of strategic priorities, and sustain organizational health and financial stability. It's a lot of good sounding things, but how are things changed from what we saw in 2019 into what we're going to be going into in 2024?
Great question. And I think that's exactly the right question, because when we were talking about strategic planning and what that means, it really is what are we going to do that's new and what are we going to do that's different. So I think that's exactly the right, that's the sort of guiding framework for thinking about strategic plan. I think that we didn't spend too much time as a strategic planning group critiquing the previous plan. But speaking just for myself, I think that my critique of the previous plan was that it felt a little bit everything but the kitchen sink. It felt like it felt like a really great statement of a holistic vision of what USAU can do, the broad range of things that USAU can do to promote Ultimate and the sport of Ultimate. And what I think it didn't quite provide, especially at the staff level for USAU as they're thinking about how to prioritize and allocate resources, was, well, what is really like the big priority for us? Because we can't do everything at 100%. And so I think the number one takeaway of the new strategic plan is we want to grow the base, and especially with a focus on Youth Ultimate. And every other thing that you mentioned in that nice sounding list, I think of as sort of a force multiplier towards that central goal of getting more people involved in the sport, especially at the youth level. And it's not that the 2019 plan didn't mention or even emphasize youth growth. But I think that this updated plan makes that a very clear primary focus and also identifies some clear areas of where we want USAU to be doing things differently than in recent years.
Now, I'm curious if you could illuminate for the audience a little bit the process of arriving at this list of prioritizations. I mean, I know that I participated in some of the survey and feedback mechanisms that were along the way, but for those who aren't aware or didn't know, can you kind of share what the process was for creating this list and drilling down into these specific items?
Yeah, totally. So it started with Tom Crawford, CEO of USA Ultimate, and I engaged a consultant who's done a lot of strategic planning for other national governing bodies. And one of her recommendations was to assemble a committee that would be both small enough to be a manageable group and also large enough to represent a lot of different stakeholder categories, from board members and staff to players, parents, coaches, local organizers, people who engage with Ultimate in a whole range of ways. And so we put together this committee and then basically said, to these 10 or 11 folks, hey, help us design a process. What we really, our goals here are, we want to, develop or refresh a vision for the sport. We want to have, a clear focus for USAU for the next few years. And we want to do this in a way that really involves the entire community so that when people look at this plan, they recognize their own insights and aspirations in it. And so there were three main parts to that. One was we assembled a bunch of focus groups. And the focus groups were defined sort of broadly according to topics that our planning committee had set out, where we're like, well, we know that any strategic plan needs to address, the issue of youth growth. We know that any strategic plan, probably wants to contend with the idea of, elite athletes and what do elite athletes want from USAU. So we defined a number of potential focus group or topics for strategic focus and put together focus groups on those and spent, 90 minutes, 2 hours with each of those focus groups, talking with various stakeholders from around the Ultimate community across different topics.
I'll just quickly disclose that I was on one of those focus groups for marketing, media and marketing, something like that.
Yep. And I think I was not involved in moderating that one. But
true.
Thank you for your participation, Charlie. So yeah, we ran these focus groups. We came up with what I would call a very rough draft of some strategic conclusions. Here's where we think there are really big strategic opportunities for us. We tried to capture those preliminary findings in a survey, which we then pushed out to the whole community. We got, off the top of my head, I don't recall, it was in the high thousands, 5,000 or 6,000 responses to that survey. So, relatively speaking, a good turnout. And then we took the conclusions from that survey and put that into a presentation, which we gave in a virtual town hall it was about 100 folks ended up attending the virtual town hall, and then took a final layer of feedback from that town hall and incorporated all of that into the strategic plan that you now see published on the website. So again, the idea here is to try to strike a balance between making sure that we're getting a really good depth of insight from the most involved stakeholders in Ultimate, that we're getting a really broad level of insight and feedback from our community. And then also that, we're doing all of this in a way that's manageable enough to actually get the plan done in time for implementation.
So let's, you said right off the top, the goal is to get more people involved in Ultimate, especially at the youth level. What are the things that you would highlight as the mechanisms to do that? What in this plan is actually directed towards doing those, achieving that specific goal?
So I'll start with a little bit of a cop out, which is that the job of the board and the job of the strategic plan is not down at the implementation level. Our job in this planning process is to define strategic priorities. And then it is Tom Crawford's job and his staff's job to then go and say, okay, how are we going to achieve this? So, I guess that's not so much a cop out as a caveat, which is to say that I have some ideas about how this can play out. And we obviously had to develop theories for what this could look like in order to make a strategic plan. But really the answer to that will arrive in an operational plan, which the staff is currently preparing. So I don't want to get too far ahead of the staff in answering that question. That being said, some things that have been really important in the past, I think we recognize that, first of all, there's a lot that can be done from the HQ level in Colorado Springs to promote the growth of the sport and especially youth growth. And then there's a lot that has to happen, can only happen at the local level, driven by local organizations. And so examples of stuff at the national level is, creating competition structures for youth, creating standards and ethical guidelines, coaching certifications, coach training programs, things that will both protect coaches and organizations from a liability perspective and also ensure that when athletes come into the sport, they're getting a really great experience. And then and then there are also programs, that USAU runs that enable local organizers that, funnel resources to local organizers. Learn to Play clinics is one example of that. Then at the local level, I think part of the recognition is that, our USAU's relationship with local disc organizations is extremely important and can be a real force multiplier when thinking about the growth of the sport. And, in a lot of ways, like, it's not realistic for USAU to think about how are we going to run clinics or create leagues or anything like that, in any given city or grow a specific community. The best thing that USAU can be doing to promote growth at that level is to provide resources and help to local organizations. And so in that way, I think that one really important recognition that came out of the strategic planning process was the current model is not working nearly as well as it needs to. Some of the biggest and most capable and most impressive local organizations do not see currently an incentive or a benefit in aligning with and collaborating with USAU. And I think that, it's less a question of asking like who's to blame and more a question of how do we create a structure that provides the right incentives and, finds all of the synergies that we know exist. So I think one of the most productive things that came out of the strategic planning process was a combination of, first of all, a level of dialogue with representatives and leaders of local disc organizations, which started in those focus groups and has continued since then. And then number two, a recognition that, what we've been doing really needs to change. And there's a lot of buy-in, I think, within USAU at the staff level, certainly on the board level, to reimagine what USAU's relationship is going to look like with local orgs going forward. And I think a good level of optimism that those relationships can get a lot better and more productive.
This leads basically exactly to one of the topics that was most interesting to me, like looking at a specific bullet point, because you're talking about the local disc orgs and the relationship and redesigning what that relationship looks like. And I know you mentioned that implementation is not necessarily what the purpose of your role was in this, but given that you were kind of recommending the pretty strong overhaul of a really important component of USA Ultimate's role in the community, was there any sort of like, okay, what stuff do you need to see done differently? Was this one of the areas where maybe USA Ultimate was looking for a little more structure, a little more what would be the alternative to what we're doing, since it is such a stark difference from where they were at? I mean, this is also one of the only bullet points that has any language that I guess could be construed as negative. It talks about mitigating perceptions of USA Ultimate as overly controlling and coercive. Pretty much all the rest of the language in the entire document is pretty glowing and rosy, as these things tend to be. But I found that striking in this specific point. So was there more to this specific relationship that y'all were asked to present in order to recommend such a big change for USA Ultimate?
I guess one way to answer that question is to just share some of the themes that came up in the focus groups as we were talking with local disc organizations. I think that, one of the biggest themes that we heard from local disc orgs was, what's the value proposition here for us and for our members? If we're going to affiliate with USAU, what do we get in exchange? And from their perspective, one of the only things that USAU has been offering is liability insurance. And some of the larger organizations have done the math and figured out that they can buy their own liability insurance for cheaper than it costs to affiliate with USAU. And so that's what they've done. And so the conversation, quickly pivoted to, well, what are the potential value propositions here? One answer to that is just a bigger revenue share, right? If your members join USAU, USAU shares more of that revenue with you as a local disc organization. And I imagine that's a formula that the staff is looking at, although that's not the only thing. Another really important piece of feedback that we got from these orgs was, one thing that we really need is just help running a small business. If I need a lawyer or an accountant or someone to help me, figure out, health insurance for my employees or something like that, like my expertise as the president of, USAU SBOX is organizing Ultimate. It's not administering a small business. And so if there are ways that you as a mature national governing body organization can help us figure out how to run a small business and provide us resources to do that, that frees up our staff time and our bandwidth to administer programs. And that creates a really important value proposition. Another example is technology. I don't know any local organizers who are really happy with the technology platforms that they work on to administer leagues and track their own members. That's something that is replicable across Ultimate communities, regardless of their size. And in fact, that's something that USAU is looking at right now in terms of, here's a really good, high impact, useful capital investment that we could make to develop that sort of a platform that local disc orgs can use. So I think where the conversation went was, there isn't a compelling value proposition right now for some local disc orgs. There is a huge area of overlap. And how can we exist more in the middle of that Venn diagram? So I also want to say that those conversations have continued in forums that I have not been a part of since the strategic plan was approved by the board. So I don't want to give the impression that I'm giving you the most up-to-date or the most complete information, but those were those were some of the themes and the flavor of the conversation that happened in the focus groups.
It's interesting because I think the top line sort of goals that are listed here largely feel like sort of not necessarily the same as the previous, but similar overtones to what we saw from before. But the actual, when you drill down and you look at the sub strategies, there's actually a lot of really interesting stuff. And you're already hitting on some of it here. Overhauling the local disc organization connectivity with affiliates and, state-based organizations. That's a huge thing. Something that people have certainly been talking about more, semi-pro collaboration. It explicitly says engage with leagues to better coordinate and connect competitive and equitable opportunities for players and coaches. Work in partnership to promote the sport and increase the fan base for Ultimate. I mean, this has basically been a complete zero from USA Ultimate in the past. And then I also wanted to note, you already talked about the technology stuff, which I think is quite interesting. But I don't want to ask too many questions at once. Semi-pro collaboration. What exactly is the directive there from the strategic plan side? And, why are we seeing an about face here after a long time of kind of, if not, just pure zero engagement, almost outright hostility at times?
Yeah, I mean, I think the conversations that we had. So I'll start by saying that in the strategic planning process, one of the areas that we were looking at specifically, and one of the focus groups we conducted, was related to semi-pro and the potential for collaboration between USAU and the semi-professional leagues. So as a strategic planning committee, we came into it with a hypothesis that there could be something here for us to do new or to do differently. And I think that where we ended up with the strategic plan was sort of in the middle of something radically different and an incremental change, where, as we were engaging with people involved in the semi-pro leagues, I would say that there was not a bright green flashing light of saying hey, there's all of this unrealized synergy here. There's an incredible strategic opportunity that we can embrace by partnering together, and we can't do this alone, but if only we combine our powers, we could do A, B, C, and D. So it didn't quite feel like that, where it's well, we're leaving a ton on the table by not having robust and cooperative relationships. But at the same time, I think we found that we have a lot of shared goals. We all care about growing Ultimate, whether for the sake of a fan base or for the sake of growing the sport that we both love. We have shared goals in publicizing the sport and raising the profile of the sport. So there are these ways in which there's a lot of compatibility. And I think the other thing that we found, which is pretty interesting in polling our community, one of the questions that we asked on the community-wide survey was, I don't remember the framing of the question exactly, but it basically posited that, hey, in the past, members of the Ultimate community have expressed concern that the values of some of these semi-pro leagues don't align fully with USAU's values or those of the community at large. And that's been a source of, hesitation for collaborating and cooperating. At the same time, there are all of these opportunities to collaborate and cooperate. And so, given all of this, what do you think the right level of collaboration and cooperation is between USAU and semi-pro leagues? And the responses were overwhelmingly positive. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it was a very small minority that said, you know, stay away at all costs, or, you know, we don't think this is appropriate at all. And so I think that, you know, in large part, the change of tone that you see in the strategic plan just reflects, you know, a change in attitudes in the broader ultimate community around the semi-pro leagues. Partly it reflects an awareness that, you know, even if we have slightly different motives or different approaches, that there are ways in which, you know, some of the things that we're trying to do harmonize with each other. You know, and then I also think, like, hats off to the semi-pro leagues. Like, they've had really cool success in a lot of ways, in terms of, you know, promoting the sport, attracting sponsors, like showcasing the sport in a really compelling format. So, you know, I think there's also like a level of humility around, like, hey, we have something that we can learn from these guys. So yeah, I think that's sort of where the plan ended up. You know, how that plays out in implementation, I think, is kind of an open question at this point.
One of the key factors in prior strategic plans, and really it's felt like the direction that USA Ultimate and the community in collaboration have kind of taken the sport has been with a focus on visibility, on professionalism, on bringing a product version of Ultimate that is desirable for potential partners and for sponsors and new stakeholders to take interest in. And that feels a bit de-emphasized in this strategic plan, which feels more community-based as a model of growth. That sort of change, do you feel like that is an implication that the previous steps were not the optimal route for us to take for growth? And how do you see that actually impacting, you know, from your personal perspective, how do you see that actually impacting what the next steps are for USA Ultimate and for the Ultimate community at large?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, as a framing thought, I will say that a strategic plan is different from an operational plan. So there's tons of stuff that USAU has done and is going to continue to do that isn't in the strategic plan, right? An example is, like, administering the club division. The entire club division is not mentioned in the strategic plan, and, like, one of the reasons for that is that the planning committee looks at all of the feedback that we have on how the club division runs, and, you know, and our conclusion is basically, hey, we're doing a pretty good job here. Like, sure, there are things that, you know, there are ways that we could enhance it with more resources, but that's not a thing that we need to be emphasizing as, like, this is an urgent, high impact area for organizational attention for doing something new or something different. So I think that one thing to emphasize in response to your question is that, you know, efforts to enhance the professionalism of the sport or to promote the sport, you know, it's not like those are stopping. It's just not what the planning committee identified as the highest impact things that USAU can focus on when considering where to devote resources. So I would start there, just to clarify that. Yeah, it's not. Well, yeah. I guess the other part of your question, though, is, sorry, I actually forgot.
No, totally okay. I mean, we're taking on some meaty topics here. So really, I'm curious about your perspective as to how you see a potential, you know, bottom-up growth component changing things for actual experience of players as compared to a focus on visibility.
Yes, I see what you're saying. I guess what I would sort of anticipate, based on the framework that I gave you just now, is that I wouldn't expect a whole lot to be changing from the perspective of, say, an elite ultimate player. You know, and I'll give you like a counterfactual. If the strategic plan had said the national governing body's most important job is to raise the level of athleticism and competition at the top of the sport and promote it as widely as possible, then maybe we would be seeing more resources flowing into ensuring that elite club ultimate and national teams are accessible to the widest array of athletes. And maybe we would see more resources flowing into, television and marketing deals that would put more games on, on national television. So I think that like the emphasis on youth and grassroots growth is more a reflection of, if we're going to be devoting more and new resources and staff attention to anything, it's going to be here. And, we can put these other areas of our operations, not on autopilot, but, we can basically keep doing what we've been doing. We can be happy about how we're doing things, on this level, and put our focus over there.
An interesting side note here is that, we've kind of had this, this tenure for Tom Crawford, which seems to be likely coming to an end at the end of the contract in 2024. We had this whole Olympic vision, which has kind of, there's no mention of Olympics in this strategic plan, and understandably so, after Ultimate didn't even make the short list for LA 2028. And it sort of seems like we're, in some ways, it's maybe unfair to say back to square one, but in a lot of ways it's like, well, it didn't really work. We tried and it didn't work. Tom Crawford, though, is heavily involved in creating this strategic plan, but presumably we're going to have a new CEO search starting now, next year. I mean, maybe you can tell us as a board member where that stands, and, how will that change over, is the CEO search going to be impacted by the strategic plan, if that makes sense?
Cool. Yeah, I don't want to get too far ahead of any any decisions or announcement that Tom might be making. I think I guess what I can say is that it certainly is relevant to thinking about the leadership of the organization going forward. I actually don't know how much Tom has said publicly about what he's planning to do. So I really don't want to get too far ahead of that, but I will say that, if and when he decides that it's time for him to hang up his proverbial cleats, a strategic plan is going to be really important, because the type of CEO that you would want to hire to execute on a plan focused on youth and grassroots growth is really different from the CEO you'd want to hire to focus on a plan that's, trying to, get us on ESPN every night. I guess, yeah, I'll pause there.
Just a quick follow up. Do you feel like and this is really kind of a personal question, I guess, more than a board one, although maybe the board has an input here. Was the Olympic push misguided, given where we've ended up?
I mean, the theory behind the Olympic push, I thought, was a really good one, which is that if it had succeeded, the resources that would have flowed from the entire Olympic apparatus into USAU and the ultimate community would have been transformational. So, it's like, it was a moonshot. It seemed like a really great calculated gamble. And if it had worked, it would have been awesome. I also think that, in fairness to Tom and to USAU, it's not like all of our eggs were in that basket. like USAU has done a ton, over the past decade to professionalize and grow the sport at every level. And like that's evident in the growth numbers. That's evident in the level of professionalism that you see at club nationals. So I guess, like, was it misguided? I mean, obviously it didn't work out the way we wanted it to. I guess another thing is, to get a little philosophical about it, you learn more from your failures than you do from your successes. And so, I mean, we don't have really authoritative specific feedback on why Ultimate didn't make it to that final round or into the Olympics. But I personally can guess that one reason that flag football would make it farther than Ultimate is that more kids are playing flag football. And if you're a decision maker sitting in that room thinking, what would be cool to have in the Olympics in 2028? And 3 people in the room have kids who play flag football and nobody has a kid who plays Ultimate. Like, that level of personal experience and engagement is going to be meaningful. So, I guess I look at, I do not think that in any way this strategic plan is a reaction to Ultimate not getting in the Olympics. Actually, one thing that was striking was that in all of our feedback, focus groups, survey, etc., I can't remember one person mentioning the Olympics. It just didn't register as a meaningful data point for folks. That being said, if we do have a goal of getting Ultimate in the Olympics at some point, I think the very best thing that we can do is grow the base of people, especially at the youth level, who are playing, because that's the thing ultimately that's going to drive participation, awareness, drive the profile of the sport, create an organic fan base, which then makes it a really compelling proposition on a whole other, level of commercial interests and everything that the Olympic committees would care about.
So, last question, and thanks for your time. We appreciate you being here. When you look ahead, when is this supposed to be through? 2024 to 2027?
Six.
I
think we're afraid there's a 3-year plan. Yeah.
At the end of 3 years, the end of 2026, and you look back, what will you say to yourself? This was a successful plan. Like, what are you going to be looking at to assess it?
Great question. The short answer is, for me, total youth participation and total membership. I think those are 2 really good, just objective indicators. I think that there are, I guess I hesitate to answer in a whole lot of detail, because actually one of the things that the board is asking the staff to do is, along with operational plans, to tell us what are the indicators that we should be looking at when evaluating the organization's performance against the goals in the strategic plan. So there's a level of detail there that I think, we're relying on the staff to provide to us, so that we can have that layer of accountability. But yeah, I think one obvious one is just total participation membership numbers. And I think another obvious one to me is going to be something related to local organizations, both quantitatively in terms of the number of local orgs and the population of local orgs that have some type of formal collaborative cooperative relationship with USAU, and then also qualitatively around, when we hold a local organization focus group feedback session in 3 years, are we still going to be hearing that there's no value proposition here, or is there going to be an improvement in that tone? So I think those are 2 really important buckets. Another part of the strategic plan that I think is much less, like fun to think about, but it is extremely important, is the revenue side of it. Right now, USAU gets almost all of its revenue from membership dues, which is, not consistent with best practices of mature national governing bodies. A lot of NGBs also have foundations that, have a combination of donor support and revenue from investments that support the operating budget of those organizations. If USAU has a foundation that has, not received a level of strategic attention that I think it needs to. Part of this strategic plan is to give the foundation a lot more attention. If that foundation can be successful in raising money and, providing a new significant revenue stream to USAU, that's going to be transformational, because it's going to mean that, the next time we go through one of these strategic planning processes, there will just be resources to do more. We won't have to think about trade-offs quite as much. So I think another really good, objective indicator to look for a few years from now is what kind of revenue are we getting aside from membership dues? And hopefully there's something there that could be really transformational for the organization.
Well, BVH, thank you very much for all the insight. What's your board term right now? I don't remember when you started and when your term ends.
Now that you mention it, I don't think I know when my term ends.
Lifetime appointment.
No, hardly. I started on the board a little less than 2 years ago.
So probably one more year, unless you get reelected.
That sounds right to me. Yeah, I'll have to do something else to qualify as an elite athlete.
Is it not like college eligibility? You don't just get like an extra 6-7 years because of the pandemic. You just stay around forever.
That should have been the number one thing in the strategic plan. Get these 7th years out of here. No. All right. Well, hopefully, I guess, you'll be engaged either way, but I hope that you're able to see how this all plays out, and we can have you back on at the end of 2026 to talk about how it's gone.
Awesome. Well, that would be really fun. I'm hopeful that we'll have a lot to show for it.
Ben van Heuvelen with us here on Deep Look. Appreciate your time.
Thanks a lot, guys. Good talking to you.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to Deep Look. Thanks again to Ben van Heuvelen for joining us and talking all about the strategic plan. Keith, this is one of those topics that people don't care about, and probably you're going to have a bunch of people fast forward, and it's probably not going to get as many YouTube views as Rowan McDonnell. And, I get all that, but I don't think there's anything more important than this next strategic plan that's happened in Ultimate in like the last probably 5 years, maybe 10 years. And I genuinely don't think that's an overstatement. This is this has the potential, at least, to be a hugely positive, complete paradigm shift in the way that Ultimate is organized in the United States. And I'm curious for what your thoughts were on what BVH had to say.
Well, he did a lot of kind of framing of what to anticipate from a strategic plan and what this means for the Ultimate community. I actually think that's a key takeaway for me, because I remember I attended a town hall where we were getting kind of the secondary survey. They'd already started to do surveys and focus groups and things like that. So they were like taking that stuff and bringing it to the town hall and asking us what we thought of it. And like the questions were hard. I mean, he talked about, the asking about the semi-pro leagues, but it was like every question was stuff like, would you rather cut off your right arm or your right leg or whatever? Do you want to stop, listening to your favorite song or your second favorite song for the rest of your life? Forks or spoons for the rest of your life? Like, these were hard questions that were really about prioritizing between two important things. And to me, that's kind of the takeaway from looking at the strategic plan and from talking to Ben about it, is that you should look at it less like these are the 4 things that we think are important to do, and more like this is the order in which these important things are going to be prioritized. So the thing at the top is the thing we are going to focus on. And secondarily, we will work on the second thing. And third, we will work on the third thing. This is a prioritization of the most important issues in Ultimate, not an identification of the 4 most important issues in Ultimate. Like, this is what the community says is their priority based on what we're seeing. And so, because he mentioned that the previous strategic plan felt a little bit like everything in the kitchen sink, and we talk about how this feels pretty similar in some ways. There's just a lot of generalities or whatever. I mean, this is a utopian view of Ultimate, really. If everything in the strategic plan were to happen, if every bullet point, every section were to happen, I mean, we're basically an Ultimate utopia, and we know that's not realistic. So when it comes down to deciding how to allocate those resources, those time, the energy, the volunteers, all that stuff, it's going to be the items at the top that are going to get that prioritization. That to me is the big takeaway of how to read this document, how to look at this and interpret what to expect from USA Ultimate.
I appreciated BVH's willingness to come out and say that basically the last strategic plan was not a failure in the like execution side of things, but like in the actual the plan itself, it did a bad job of setting out a strategy because there was too many things going on. So true. We said it at the time. It was clearly a problem throughout that time. And of course, the whole organization had to pivot to just survive COVID and focus on like making sure you had enough money in the bank to pay your staff and like furloughs and everything else that had to go on. Really tough couple of years. And you kind of set that aside. But man, am I encouraged by what I see here? Because what I see, and I don't feel like I saw this in the last strategic plan very much. What I see here is responsiveness to what they are hearing from the community and from the people who are engaged on these issues. I mean, how long did USA Ultimate basically just ignore the complaints about the affiliate process? I mean, we've been complaining about that on this podcast for years. And the youth development side of things, technology, there's so many opportunities for USAU right now to take leadership in areas where we desperately need the organization to do it. And they have, in some cases failed to do it to this point. Technologically, the organization has done a terrible job in the last decade. Like, yes, they refreshed the main website, but Score Reporter is brutal. And there's no home for registration for, all tournaments and leagues and things that is like a really good unified platform. And so that's a huge opportunity for USAU. And I'm glad that they are seeing that as a thing to do. But, and I'm also encouraged because I'm seeing USA Ultimate taking the steps, right? They're creating a new director of youth programming person whose job it is to just focus on that. And it's not underneath competition department. It's its own department. Youth is its own department. And they announced that before they announced the strategic plan. They've been trying to hire for that position for, I don't know, a couple months now. I don't think they've announced who that is yet. So maybe not hired, but really encouraging to me, all of these, the focuses that they have. I mean, who's looking at this and saying, nah, they blew it? I doubt you're going to hear that from anybody. This is the right vision for how to like start to come back from the pandemic. And the fact that there's basically no mention of what we talk about the most in this program, which is elite competitive college and club ultimate, is totally fine, because what needs to change there that's dramatic? Nothing. I think BVH said it perfectly. It's like going pretty good.
Yeah, I hear that too. And I do wonder, if there's some stuff down the priority list that, maybe the technology component, like, is that going to be a focus? Is the communications, that feels like it's further down the list to me. And something that we constantly talk about is a lack of transparency and communication, or slow communication from the organization to the members and players. There's some mention of, how do we create a stronger pipeline? Like, even if we do right now, get higher visibility. Let's say we partner with the semi-pro leagues, or we're on a major TV network. How do we get people from watching Ultimate and thinking, oh, wow, that's cool, to playing Ultimate and becoming a paying member who can help be a part of the revenue stream and help grow the community and potentially volunteer and all the kinds of things that we benefit from when additional people join the community? Like, how do we do all that? How do we also keep Ultimate accessible? Like, these are the questions that you have to ask. And some of these things are further down the list. And so I'll be curious to see how the actual implementation comes together. I mean, obviously that's going to be where the rubber meets the road. And so, you can't be mad at a strategic plan for not being an operational one. That's just not the job here. But I will be curious for more detail on what that's going to look like. But I do think that some of the things that we've talked about is the most important. The relationship with local disc orgs and the SBOs is being perhaps the biggest of all of those. But the semi-pro leagues, creating resources, including a full-time position to help organize Youth Ultimate. As like I mentioned, being a part of a organization myself right now that's thinking about, okay, how can we engage with Youth Ultimate? There's definitely stuff that could be useful for us. So I think that those are things that we think are valuable. The community has been very clear, I think, on the fact that basically it feels very unanimous that we should be focusing on growing Youth Ultimate from the bottom up. To the people I talk to, that is the sentiment. So with that being the prevailing sentiment, yeah, it's great to have that responsiveness and to see that being the priority.
Two final thoughts. One, USAU is taking an approach here which feels like a major change to me, which is that it's no longer this paternalistic USA Ultimate knows best attitude. And instead they're saying, how do we work together with our partners across all of these facets in order to build a sport? It has been a combative relationship between USA Ultimate and many other organizations in Ultimate for a while. You look at this Northwest and like the petty fights that have happened there. You look at the AUDL and the like wars of words that have happened there. I mean, you can look at other big disc orgs, and it's just it felt like USAU when they're challenged for a policy or something has been extremely defensive in the past 5-6 years. This to me feels like a complete departure from that. And that is a huge, huge thing, because if there's one thing that I feel like is super important right now, it's that we all start to go in the same direction as a sport. Not that there aren't going to be disagreements and thoughts about how to do things differently, but like the organizations need to say, hey, we need to figure out ways that we can have the rising tide lift all the boats and not try to like build canals and moats for our own things. So that's point one. Point two, the fundamental challenge right now in Ultimate, I think from a youth standpoint, at least, is even a problem in the adult side of things to an extent. Kid is like, plays Ultimate at PE. It's like, wow, I love Ultimate. This is super fun. I would love to play Ultimate. Hey, mom and dad, I love playing Ultimate. This is so fun. Can I play Ultimate? And then the parents go, yeah, let's find something for you to do this summer. Doesn't exist. Now, I'm not saying that's true everywhere. Seattle, Triangle, Minnesota, they have programs. But like many, many places in the US don't have that. There is no option. There is no league. There is no clinic. There is no nothing. There is no opportunity to play unless you are at a high school that happens to have a team. And that is a killer when it comes to getting people actually playing, right? The idea of a learn to play clinic where the kids come out and they throw Frisbee around with, coaches and elite players, and they learn the backhand and forehand and, the basic structure, and hey, it's so fun. There's nowhere to go from there. And that has to change. And that, I think, it's great that USA Ultimate is recognizing they can't change that on their own. Learn to play clinic is a nice idea, but it doesn't get you anywhere if you don't have somewhere for people to land and continue to engage with the sport. And we don't have good engagement opportunities for anybody who's not at a college, a high school with a team, or in a city with an adult program. But even then, you probably need to have played before, or it's hard to get involved. So if we can work to solve that problem, and USA Ultimate can help local orgs like Connecticut Ultimate, what is that the name of your org?
Yeah.
If they can help Connecticut Ultimate develop programs for kids to be able to have a springtime, after school camp or a summer camp, like that's how we can actually start to create people to become players for the long term. So I'm very encouraged. Turning now to a topic that a piece of news that broke last week, the Oregon Onyx will not be returning to the Western Ultimate League in 2024. And the Western Ultimate League sent out an email and made a press release about this. They said the WUL board has voted Onyx's ownership group, Pearl Sports Group, ineligible to operate a team. So keep in mind, there have been issues raised from players on the Onyx for the last 2 seasons about not being paid. They did not get paid until they made a stink. And then eventually payments started coming very reluctantly and slowly. And now the Onyx is out of the league. And this appears to have been a fairly abrupt decision. And you can hear a lot more from our sister podcast, the Double Overtime, with Jenna Weiner and Sasha Vogel, who have an Onyx player on this week for an interview. So, Keith, this is the first domino to fall in what has been a little bit of rumblings over the last couple of months about just sort of struggles in general for semi-pro franchises. We've heard some similar things about teams in the PUL. I've heard other WL teams are in danger potentially of not coming back for 2024 as well. So I'm just curious for your thoughts on kind of where things stand here and what to take away from the Onyx being out.
Unfortunate for fans up in that area. Obviously there's a super strong community there where they've been like on such a upward trajectory. We've seen so much success at the youth level and even some increased renewed success at the college level. Historical, we're just coming off Dark Star, making nationals too. Like there's a lot of great energy there. So unfortunate that the pro scene hasn't really been able to keep up. But this is the challenges of being a burgeoning league. We saw similar processes from the AUDL when they were first starting. Teams kind of flittering in and out of the league, and once you get past that initial surge of energy, it can be hard to maintain. We've seen that even in other endeavors, right? Like right around that 3-year mark, I feel like is where things start to get real hard. Like all that early momentum you picked up, it can wear off. We've seen that with, tours in the past and things like that. It's difficult to keep it going, through that time. Obviously challenges with the ownership group. Like I don't know how this relationship would have remained tenable. I don't know also like what recourse there is to pick up the pieces here. Like, if you go to Eisenbray on Double Overtime talks about, players are missing reimbursement for covering team expenses and things like that. Like whose pocket is that going to come out of? Hopefully the league has, some rainy day fund kind of thing to help out. But it's a difficult situation to put the team in and the players in, when we know how much players already generally sacrifice to play Ultimate. And part of the big appeal of playing in semi-professional leagues is not having to do that, particularly take the financial sacrifice. Also, you kind of isolate Seattle in the Western Ultimate League. It's not a position they're totally unfamiliar with, but it's the second time we've seen an Oregon franchise fold. So you're concerned about what the long-term prospects are for that community as far as semi-pro. And I know there's also people wondering about what does this mean for the Portland Nitro, who are owned by the same ownership group in the UDL. Like, are they gonna be able to persist? So a lot of questions left.
I mean, that franchise is a horrible mess. Whether they come back or not, it's been an absolute disaster.
I mean, I don't know much about the inner workings, but I know they lose a lot of games and they got ugly jerseys. So to me, that's a mess.
I feel like maybe this is a stretch, but the macro environment has changed a lot since the early days of semi-pro. Interest rates are at 5%. It's money is not as freely flowing around. And does that have an impact on these cash burning enterprises? Because let's be honest, outside of a couple of franchises in the AUDL, people are not making money doing this. And does the calculus change because the overall economic environment is different? You know, we haven't seen robust growth in terms of viewership or people in the stands at games in an across the board way at any of these semi-pro endeavors. There are certainly one-off games. There are certain franchises who seem to do well with attendance. And typically those are the ones that were doing well with attendance 5+ years ago. You know, you look at Madison, for instance. They've always done well relative to the AUDL average. And they continue to exceed on the average side. So I don't know. I just think while this maybe is an isolated incident, I am curious if we see more contraction as opposed to expansion in the short term.
Yeah, I mean, there was a player on Astra who was tweeting about like, this is saying basically this is not too dissimilar from what's happening in LA, like what you're hearing about. I've
heard the same thing about LA.
Yeah, so we'll see if there are. You said dominoes, like the whole idea behind evoking the dominoes metaphor is that they run into each other. So it's not just a one-on-one. Nobody talks about dominoes when you just drop one on the floor. So there's some concern that there could be more. There could be a ripple effect here, or that this could be just kind of the first of multiple, and not specifically even in the Western Ultimate League, but just in the semi-pro environment, as you may see due to a different financial environment, in part like a constriction, as you trim some of the areas where there's not sustainable growth.
And this is not anything new for emerging sports leagues. Like the overall capitalization of semi-pro ultimate is a tiny amount of money relative to what, you see even like from like Major League Lacrosse or something like that. And yet, those orgs, MLS, right? They've had tons of contraction. I wonder how many MLS teams have folded. I'm just going to Google it right now. Of course, it's not going to be easy, but like there's so many teams. Let's see. Former teams. So there's only 3 teams listed as former teams. But then there's like teams that have folded in the past and like re-emerged, like San Jose. I don't know. It's a bumpy road, even for leagues that are 10, 20, 50 times the size of what's going on in Ultimate.
Definitely. And I don't think that even the leagues are going to be surprised to come across this. I mean, I think you know that the chances that your founding members are going to survive into whatever qualifies as success, longevity for your league are just pretty slim. I mean, you could probably look at major professional leagues, the things that we think of as like the Goliaths of sport right now, and see that there are founding franchises that either didn't make it or had to move. Right? This is commonplace.
Yeah, I mean, there's 14 AUDL teams that have existed and now no longer do. 14. They can have their own league. The Graveyard League. Perfect. Halloween revival. All right. Time for the question of the week. Keith, what do we got?
All right. So we haven't done a question of the week in a little bit. We've obviously had a lot on our plate. So let's go to this one from Hello Goodbye. If you could buy or sell a Frisbee season experience, which do you think would go for a higher price? New York Blueprint or DC Truck Stop? I'll even expand upon that if there are teams beyond that which you think would be interesting to discuss. Which of those would be a more valuable experience to purchase, do you think?
I mean, I think the answer is obvious. I think
Machine?
the answer is Blueprint, and it's machine. I think the answer is clearly Blueprint. I mean, for the vast majority of Ultimate players, the dream is getting to nationals, and most of them don't get there. And sure, winning nationals has its own draw, and like playing on the best team in the country for a 2-year span, right? That's an exciting prospect as well. But let's be honest. I mean, Truck's own players are like feeling a little weird about winning nationals. And that changes the calculus. I'm not sure I would answer Truck even if it was some kind of perfect, never a question, they won all their games 15-9 kind of scenario. I think that, for me, somebody who played on regional club teams back in the day, and for the large majority of Ultimate players, that's the dream, is being on a team like Blueprint and actually getting the job done and getting to nationals. A team like Truck Stop, they expect to go to nationals. To me, it's more rewarding to like get over this hurdle that's so hard to get over than it is to, win the whole thing when you're a really, really good team. That just the way that I look at it.
I would go the other way on that component. Yeah, the Truck Stop stuff, after our interview with Rowan McDonald last week, like, yeah, too conflicted, too complicated in a set of emotions. If Truck Stop had just like gone out there and won it for the first time, like, come on, that to me, even if you come in as the number 1 seed, you're hanging on by a thread basically on the first day. You come back, you band together, you win the title, first title for your program, for your city, for everybody on your team, pretty much. Like that to me is it. Blueprint had a great run, and they like grinded it out against Sprout, and were heroes for a moment. It's cool to see them celebrated. Like I think the experience would be pretty valuable. Don't get me wrong, but I'm trying to get rings, bro. I'm trying to get rings.
I respect that. But I just think like there's something more satisfying, probably. Not that I've ever made nationals or won nationals, but like getting there when you're the underdog and you've like many of the players involved have grinded for years and years to get to that point.
There's a person to ask, Charlie. We got to ask Box. Box had the miracle plays for Georgetown. Remember when they qualified? So he has been a part of
He's been on one of those teams.
Tiny team that nobody thought would make it to nationals, makes it to college nationals, and now he's also done the championship thing. So like Box would be a good one. I'm sure there's other people.
There's plenty of players that have moved their way up from regional grinder to nationals team player. Weigh in, email us, deeplook@ultiworld.com. Hit us up at deeplookpod on Twitter.
You can tell if you need to be anonymous.
Truck,
tell us,
right? If you don't want to deal with the like asterisk component, like just make it whichever nationals winning team that you want. Like, would you rather be on the regionals team that's the underdog that somehow makes it through the game to go and wins it, or winning a national championship?
We might just have to post this on, as a poll. Can you do polls on Insta? Because I'm not trying to post anything on X anymore.
Yeah, put it on the Ultiworld Insta. Post anything on X.
I'm not trying to X nothing, bro.
They just got rid of circles, I heard. I never really did anything with that, but they just keep killing off features. It's crazy.
I'm too much of a boomer to know what to do with circles, but I saw Ultimate players lamenting it, so rip. Condolences.
All right, well, that's going to wrap up a big show today. Thanks for tuning in. For Keith Rayner, I'm Charlie Eisenhood saying so long. Hit us up with your thoughts at DeepLookPod on X, deeplook@ultiworld.com on email. We'll talk to you next week.